Hey, Faith family, it's Justin here. I'm sitting in my living room ready for a second devotional, and I'm excited to talk about what I have to talk about today. But I hope that last week you were able to take those questions at the end of the video, of the end of the devotional, and either one, sit around the dinner table and discuss them with family. I think that's a cool thing to be able to do, is to sit and have Bible conversations with family members, with teenagers. Or maybe you were just able to take those questions and go into quiet time and just enjoy having some questions to ask yourself, and spend that time with God to reveal some things to you. But I know it's so different in this time of social distancing, everything. I'm so ready to be done with social distancing, of staying in place orders. I'm ready to worship with our church family on Sunday, even though we have these rules that we do have to follow in order to be able to do that. I'm excited to be able to just to worship with other people. There's something special about bringing God's people together, and we can accomplish great things together. So it's exciting that we no longer just have to meet online, but we're able to start meeting face to face. But with God's people coming together, I believe that there's a purpose in which now is the time. Now is the time for us to do something that God is calling us to do. So I was talking with Casey the other day. We were driving and we were kind of discussing like what it feels like right now being in this social distancing, stay in place time frame, and it just feels mundane, right? It feels like the movie Groundhog's Day. Every day seems very similar. We get up, later than we normally probably would get up if we were having to go to work or school, and we log onto our computers and we work from home. We do our school from home, and then when we're done with school, maybe if you're a student, you're doing your TikToks, your Snapchats, all that type of stuff, watching Netflix on your phone, waiting for your parents to get done with work so you can ask them what's for dinner. Parents, you're probably sitting there working, thinking what's for dinner, and hoping that someone else can make it, that you could go to a restaurant and sit down and enjoy a meal that you didn't have to make. But that's not the world we live in. It's very mundane. Everything seems very similar from the day before. And I was starting to think on what that would look like in the Bible, and I just was coming to the Israelites wandering around the desert after escaping from Egypt, and they were just in the desert for 40 years. They get to the promised land once, and they weren't ready for it. 10 out of 12 spies were too scared to go in. So they wandered around the desert more, and I'm like, that feels mundane. If you're walking around a desert for years on end, you're seeing the same thing. You're seeing sand. I haven't been in many deserts, but I know that there's a lot of sand, and everything tends to look the same. So you see the same thing every day. You're around the same people every day. It's not like you're gonna go and see a different person that day. Like, the people around you are the people around you, and you eat the same thing every day. I can't imagine being in quarantine and having to eat the same thing every day. As the manna fell from the sky, that's what they had to eat. I pray that God let that taste different occasionally, but that was their life every day. They lived the same thing, and they got there was a whole generation that passed away and a new generation that rose up during that time. and they came to the promised land again. And this time, the second time they came to the promised land, they were ready. They were ready to rely on God to go into the promised land. And I pray that as we are starting to open up Texas, it's really cool. But God has something for us. God has used this season to prepare us for something. And I pray that we're able to find that we're able to step out when we get into that promised land, what God is calling us to do, that we are not scared to do it. That we are not scared to accomplish the task that God sets before us. That we can step out in faith and rely on God's strength during that time. God quickly let those Israelites know that he was the one to be relied on. When they march around Jericho and yell at a wall and the walls come down, they didn't do that. God did that. They relied on God and won that battle. So for us, I feel like we need to rely on God. And I came to a passage of scripture. This is Jeremiah 29. We're going to start at verse 10. And this is a letter to the people exiled by Babylon. And God is speaking to them. And this is what he says to them. He says, "When 70 years are complete for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." That's through verse 13. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at those verses and just knowing that God has a plan and a purpose for everything. He has a plan and a purpose to get us out of social distancing. He has a plan and a purpose for us once we are out of it. God is calling us to do something. So my questions for you this week, God's, the things I see that in the scripture that God's calling us to do is he's calling us to call upon him. He's calling us to pray, and he's calling us to seek after him using his word. So my questions for you this week are, when do you find it easy to rely on God? When is it easy for you to just trust God and rely on him to do the things that he's promised already he's going to do? On the opposite, when is it hardest to trust God? When is it hardest to rely on God in your life? If it's easy in some moments, there's always moments where it's hard. So when is it easy and when is it hard to rely on God? What is one practical way to help you pray and seek God more this week? What is a way that you can, maybe it's setting aside a certain time, maybe it's going out on a walk, maybe it is having scripture time with parents or with family or a friend over Zoom or FaceTime or something where you're seeking after who God is. God calls us to seek after him. And then my last thing is to find a piece of scripture that helps remind you that God is never going to fail you. If you want, you can post that scripture in the comments of the video. Just scripture that helps you remember that God never fails us. Man, I'm so excited for Sunday to be able to worship with some of you guys. It's just going to be great to have that time again. And I'm praying for you. I love you guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you again soon.